Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Vaibhav Jyotsna Srivastav, and with me is Sara Mushtaba, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. In Sri Lanka, acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe, Anurag Kumar Dissanayaka and Dulas Allaperuma to contest for the presidency in Parliament tomorrow. All-party meeting held in New Delhi to discuss Sri Lanka situation. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar says India provided $8 billion to Sri Lanka while no other country came forward. Bangladesh announces a countrywide load shedding up to 2 hours daily starting from today. Iran to join as the newest member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In a three-way summit, Iran hosts Russia and Turkey for talks on the Syria war today. Western Europe sweltered today as a ferocious heat wave heads north. Deadly wildfire in France, Portugal, Spain and Greece forces thousands to evacuate their homes. And Mehraj Ahmad Khan becomes first Indian shooter to win gold medal in men's skeet event at ISSF World Cup in South Korea. Acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe along with members of Parliament Anurag Kumar Dissanayaka and Dulas Allaperuma will contest for the presidency tomorrow in the Sri Lankan Parliament. Nominations for the three candidates were proposed and seconded by their respective parties. During the special session of the Parliament held on Monday, Dhammika Dassanayake, Secretary General of Parliament, announced the vacancy for the post of President. The post of the President fell vacant after the resignation of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who had fled the island nation in the wake of widespread protests. The protesters had called for the resignation of the President and the Prime Minister, blaming them for the worst economic crisis in the history of Sri Lanka. Security was beefed up by using safety fence around the Parliament complex with the support of the armed forces. Acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe had declared emergency with effect from Monday ahead of the presidential election as the country grapples with social unrest and crippling economic crisis. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has said that India has given $3.8 billion assistance for ameliorating the serious economic situation in Sri Lanka. He said no other country has given this level of support to Sri Lanka this year. Briefing reporters after chairing an all-party meeting convened by the centre discussed the Sri Lankan crisis in New Delhi today. Dr. Jaishankar said, in Sri Lanka there is a very serious crisis and situation is unprecedented. Sri Lanka is a close neighbour and India will play a supportive role. He said if there is instability in any neighbouring country, that is a matter of deep concern to India. Dr. Jaishankar said 2 presentations were given to the leaders of the political parties on political perspective and economic crisis in Sri Lanka.
We had done 2 presentations. One was a presentation which was done from a political perspective, from a foreign policy perspective, which explained to all the leaders the political turbulence in Sri Lanka, the economic crisis which was there, the debt situation, the support that India has given, $3.8 billion assistance. No other country has given this level of support to Sri Lanka this year. And the initiatives that we are taking, how to help them and facilitate their engagement with other bodies including IMF and with other debtors.
Bangladesh announced a countrywide load shedding up to 2 hours daily starting from today to save energy and fuel in view of the crisis caused by the Ukraine war. The load shedding will be carried out initially for about a week, and if it is not sufficient, the government will increase the duration of the load shedding, said State Minister for Power, Energy and Mineral Resources Nasrul Hamid. The minister said that the government will not buy gas from the international market as prices have increased abnormally. The government has also decided to shut down the diesel-fired power generation plants temporarily to minimize power crisis caused by the rise in fuel price in the international market. The minister said that the measure will help save a substantial amount of gasoline. Prime Minister's advisor for Power, Energy and Mineral Resources, Tawfiq-e-Ilahi Chaudhary, told media in Dhaka on Tuesday that the power shortfall of around 1,000 to 1,500 megawatts has forced the authorities to go for load shedding throughout the country periodically. He further said that filling stations in the country will also be shut down once a week. He assured that the decision is temporary and full production of electricity will be resumed immediately after the improvement in the global situation. He said that the government will take further decisions after observing the situation for a week. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on developments in Sri Lanka. In conversation are Yogendra Kumar, former ambassador, and Sanjay Jha, journalist.
Sri Lanka is facing an economic and political crisis with inflation and severe shortage of fuel and other essential supplies. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa had gone into hiding after protesters stormed his residence on July 9, and his resignation was finally accepted by the Parliament Speaker. The 225-member Parliament will elect a new president by a vote tomorrow. India is the closest neighbor and obviously keeping an eye on the developments in island nation. Central government is holding all-party meeting over Sri Lankan crisis today. What do you think is going on in Sri Lanka?
Well, Sri Lanka is going through an extremely difficult time, and the situation is quite fluid there, because what's actually happening is that this particular election which is taking place in the parliament tomorrow is taking place in the background of the present government having been practically overthrown by street protests. And it shows two things in my view. One, of course, is that the parliamentary composition as it is now has been unable to actually, in a way, steer the political turmoil and the economic turmoil inside Sri Lanka, even though it's been going on for at least last 3 or 4 months. The second point is that also shows that there is a kind of an inbuilt or intrinsic contradiction between what you have as a current formal political parliamentary system or executive president system and the street protesters. So they are, of course, it's basically spontaneous, in a way, upsurge, but there clearly are different perspectives on their part as to how the current economic and political crisis is to be handled. Therefore, tomorrow's election, as it is being planned, in a way, we'll have to watch very carefully, because it may or it may not lead to the end of the current political crisis. And that end of the political crisis is important before, let's say, the country's leadership can gear itself for tackling the economic crisis. And that's why you can understand in India also the considerable unease. You have an all-party meeting we called today, and already the DMK and the All India Anna DMK, they have already actually been asking the government for intervention. And you can understand it's a very tricky situation, because when our High Commissioner called on the Speaker of the Sri Lankan Parliament, he of course went to give support to the democratic process in Sri Lanka, and of course to say that India is prepared to assist in whatever manner it's possible for, economic development and economic stability. But after he came back from his meeting, there were protests outside the Indian High Commission, because the relationship actually is quite sensitive and delicate between India and Sri Lanka. Therefore, you can understand why the fluidity is so much, and that's why there is also concern amongst the, let's say, our political leaders in India.
Yeah, absolutely. Tamil Nadu, which is the next to the Sri Lanka, and if you see the distance between the island country and Tamil Nadu, it's not really that much. And that's why always whenever there is a crisis in Sri Lanka, we see an influx of refugees in the state, and that also affects the security of the state. So the central government is obviously calling for Suamoto meeting to address the concerns of the political parties like DMK and AIDMK and in the southern India. But how it has exacerbated in Sri Lanka, people are talking about COVID-19, the failing of tourism industry. What exactly you think has led to this situation in Sri Lanka?
There is a continuing history of political instability in Sri Lanka. For example, if you remember, 2005 you had the presidential elections. That is when Mahinda Rajapaksa came to power. This is before the end of the conflict, in the civil conflict in Sri Lanka, which took place in 2009. But the point is that since that time, no government there or no president has been in a position to actually complete the constitutionally mandated term of 6 years. And every time a president has come to power, there has been this urge in the incumbent that after having consolidated the political position, he should call for fresh elections to further consolidate. And you find, therefore, this kind of turbulence going on. And the last one, of course, was 2019 presidential election, when the previous president, where you had Sirisena, who actually defected from Mahinda Rajapaksa's government, he, along with Ranil Wickremesinghe, they actually, anyway, the presidential election took place. Sirisena was able to defeat Mahinda Rajapaksa. But then, even that government was rather unstable, and there was a constitutional crisis, which took place in the constitutional crisis. And then, of course, as you know, that again, you had the Easter bombing, which took place in April 2019. And therefore, the instability has been such which has then finally led to the emergence of the Rajapakses, in fact, Mahinda, but also Gotabaya, as a strong man kind of a personality, figure, to control the situation. But because of this kind of inbuilt instability, shifting political alliances amongst the existing political parties there, the leaders or the presidents actually have been sort of in one way under some kind of imperative necessity to actually then indulge in much more populistic economic measures, which have all led to economic fragility and received an internal and external shock. Internal shock, of course, was the coronavirus. They handled very well the first wave, but then when the tourism sector collapsed, it aggravated the economic condition in Sri Lanka. And then you have the ongoing Ukraine crisis, leading to fuel price shortages and fuel price hike, and of course the food price hike. So you find now situation become quite tangled at the moment, and we just have to see how it takes this tomorrow. And of course, as I think we're all watching the television and following the news stories from Sri Lanka, generally India's role has been appreciated by all sides. That I think is quite evident. So in one way, we have a lot of stakes and we have a certain amount of influence, so to say, but we're very careful as to how the situation, by watching and maybe perhaps through some kind of means just to see that the political and economic development there is such as to lead to further stability in Sri Lanka.
Absolutely. Indian government and Indian establishment is wishing for a stable government in Sri Lanka. After the crisis started and the protest 3-4 months back, Indian government has contributed a lot in terms of food grain. Yesterday, fertilizers were also sent to Sri Lanka. Fuel is also, I think India is the sole supplier right now. So Indian government is of course contributing, and Sri Lankans have also appreciated this fact. How concerned are we in terms of instability in Sri Lanka?
Concerns are quite genuine because of the fact, of course, we have very close ethnic relations, civilizational contacts, relations between the two countries and its proximity. So what happens there actually has an effect on India. That's something that we have to watch. For example, if you remember the spillover of the Tamil conflict in Sri Lanka affected us. Then when you had the Easter bombing, for example, they were concerned that there were some links of these people in southern region of India. That's one side. So you realize how closely we have to work with the Sri Lankan government to see that situation does not remains in a way under control. But even no less importantly, our economic relations are also very strong. You might recall that the Colombo port is a major transshipment point for Indian containers. The containers originating from, let's say, the east coast of India, they all are taken to the Colombo port, most of them, which are westbound. And similarly, the Indian shipping containers originating on the western coast and are eastbound, again, they take into Colombo, and then from there, they're transshipped further east. So you can imagine how closely linked two countries are. And therefore, this is a situation that we have to watch. And apart from the larger issues of regional security and stability and so on and so forth, which we all are very well aware of and we read and write about in our media and elsewhere.
Sri Lankan Parliament has started the process to elect a new president after the astounding people's uprising against Gotabaya Rajapaksa last week and his resignation. Current acting president Ranil Wickremesinghe, Tulas Alha Paramume and Anura Kumara Disanaike are the main three candidates in the fray. So Sri Lanka is going to witness a three-cornered race for presidency tomorrow. Now, with these three candidates coming up, although the voting in the parliament is going to be a secret ballot, what do you think are the stakes for acting president Ranil Wickremesinghe, who's the most veteran politician among all three candidates? He has been the prime minister for 6 times. He always wanted to be the president of the country, but never got a chance to get elected. So what do you think is going to happen?
The SLPP, which is the current party in power and which has not the majority, but they are the strongest presence in the Sri Lankan parliament. He is clearly the nominated candidate. Therefore, you can understand that in one way, the Gotabaya Rajapakses and the establishment are actually, in a way, rooting for him and supporting him by whatever means they can. At the same time, as you would recall, that his own private residence was burned down by the protesters. And just yesterday, he once again announced national emergency, giving power to the military and the police to control the situation by all necessary means. So the reason, of course, is that there is a certain amount of distrust between the, public protesters and the current incumbent acting president. So understand that is one complication. in his candidature. The other one, of course, is that Mr. Dullas Alaha Peruma is a Buddhist nationalist, and he actually, in a way, represents again a breakaway faction of the SLPP, and also he commands a certain number of MPs. And in fact, what actually happened is that Sajid Premadasa, who actually is the leader of the SJB party or SJP group, he has withdrawn his candidature in support of Mr. Dullas Alaha Peruma. Of course, it seems there's an understanding between them that when he gets elected, then Mr. Premadasa would become the Prime Minister. So the aim seems to be that they want to wean away as many votes as possible from the SLPP, which is the Rajapakse's kind of a group there. And neither of them is in a position or confident that they actually command the majority. Though, of course, it seems that Mr. Wickremesinghe's chances seem to be better. But you never know about these things because there's all secret ballot. And the other important point is that Mr. Anur Kumar Disnaike, he is a JVP leader. He's more of a leftist kind of a oriented politician, again, a person who has ministerial experience, and he actually belongs to the other alliance of which you have Mr. Premadas as the leader. So it's quite possible that there might be a kind of a breakage or let's say rupture of the votes on the opposition side. So at the moment the situation seems to be a little fluid and uncertain. But the important point is that all these developments in a way suggest that there are larger issues in the political scenario that prevails at the moment in Sri Lanka. One is that like JVP, they want that there should be early elections. And Mr. Wickremesinghe is hoping that he will continue for the remaining part of the presidential term, which will last until 2024. At the same time, the protesters, they actually want early elections, number one. Number two, they want actually the abolition of the executive presidency. So in a way, they want to go back to the earlier political system in Sri Lanka, which is more like the Westminster kind, the prime ministerial system like we have in India. Then again, the question as to what kind of an economic policy will be pursued by whichever, let's say, candidate actually becomes the president after the election parliament. So there are these inbuilt contradictions in the situation, and therefore there's a degree of fluidity, because even, for example, this national emergency which has been declared, now been declared about 3 times earlier, and each time they've had to withdraw because the public pressure was so much that the police found it difficult to actually control the situation. So you see there's an inbuilt kind of tension on the street at the moment. And therefore, at the moment, the situation to me seems to be somewhat. But, there's still several hours ahead. So we don't know what kind of further alliances and political combinations emerging amongst the members of the Sri Lankan parliament. And we just have to wait and see.
Thank you very much for your time and letting us your view about the developments in Sri Lanka.
Thank you. My pleasure.
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization SCO is set for its second expansion with Iran to be added as its newest member at the upcoming summit in the historic city of Samarkand in mid-September under the Uzbekistan presidency. SCO Secretary General Shang Ming said that he expects to see a memorandum of obligations of Iran joining the SCO to be passed at the summit. Belarus has also applied for SCO membership. The Secretary General told the media in Beijing on Friday that legal process regarding Belarus's application for SCO membership will soon start but will require the consensus of all the member states. The decision to admit Iran was made in last year's Dushanbe summit. SCO foreign ministers meeting on the 28th and 29th of July will set the agenda for the Samarkand summit, where SCO expansion is among the issues that leaders of the grouping are likely to discuss. This SCO summit is being held amid major geopolitical developments like the war in Ukraine, the situation in Afghanistan, cross-border terrorism, extremism, supply chain logistics, and connectivity with Eurasia. Former UK Finance Minister Rishi Sunak won the latest round in the contest today to replace British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. With lawmaker Kemi Badenoch eliminated from the contest, it is now down to 3 contenders. The British Indian former Chancellor received 118 votes in the 4th round of voting by his party colleagues, just shy of the 120 mark, or 1/3 of the Conservative Party MPs, which is needed to confirm his place as one of the final contenders in the race to replace Boris Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak increased his tally from yesterday's 115 votes, while Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt got 92 votes and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss got 86 votes, leaving the race to clinch second place still open. Before the Commons finishes on Thursday, the Conservative Party wants MPs to choose the two candidates to replace Prime Minister Johnson, with the final vote set to take place tomorrow. After a summer of campaigning by the two final contenders, grassroots Tories will vote for who should become the leader, with the winner to be announced on the 5th of September.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has suspended two important figures in his government, questioning their leadership qualities and accusing many of their subordinates of treason and collaborating with Russia. The two high-ranking officials, Prosecutor General Irina Venediktova and State Security Service SBU head Ivan Bakanov, a long-time associate of the president, are now subject to an investigation and have been temporarily replaced. In Iran, President Ibrahim Raisi will host his Russian and Turkish counterparts today for talks on the Syrian war in a three-way summit. Russian President Vladimir Putin reached Tehran today to hold the talks with his Iranian and Turkish counterparts. During his visit, President Putin will hold talks with his Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, as the two countries have recently strengthened their cooperation and are considering striking a strategic partnership deal. President Putin will also hold talks with his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan, where they are expected to negotiate full-scale economic cooperation between Moscow and Ankara and address the issue of grain supplies from Ukraine's Black Sea. The meeting will also provide a chance for Russia and Tehran, both under severe Western sanctions, to showcase their military and economic cooperation. The Russian president's visit to Iran comes about a week after the White House said Tehran is preparing to sell armed drones to Russia for use in Ukraine. Later in the day, the three leaders will hold a tripartite summit in which they are expected to discuss the situation in Syria, since the countries are guarantor states of the Astana format talks and strive to reach a peaceful solution to the decade-long conflict.
United Kingdom Conservative MPs will vote again today as they continue the process of choosing the two candidates for leader who will be put to a vote of members. One of the four remaining contenders, Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss and Kemi Badenoch, will be eliminated when the result is announced later. On the other hand, Prime Minister Boris Johnson will hold his last scheduled cabinet meeting ahead of the Westminster's summer recess. The Conservative Party wants MPs to have chosen the two candidates to replace him before the Commons finishes on Thursday, with the final vote set to take place on Wednesday. After a summer of campaigning by the two final contenders, grassroots Tories will vote for who should become leader, with the winner to be announced on the 5th of September. International Monetary Fund IMF warned that a Russian gas embargo would lead to severe recessions in Eastern Europe and Italy if countries around the world hoarded their own scarce supplies. The IMF predicted that unless liquid natural gas was shared and prices were artificially held down, any Russian action to stop supplying Europe would trigger economic contractions over the next year in the Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia and Italy. Reuters reported that Russia's Gazprom has told customers in Europe it could not guarantee gas supplies because of extraordinary circumstances, adding to fears that Moscow may not restart the Nord Stream 1 pipeline on Thursday.
Western Europe is facing more sweltering temperatures today as a ferocious heat wave heads north. Britain recorded its hottest ever day today, with temperatures hitting a high of 40.2 degrees Celsius in South England, according to provisional data from the Met Office. It comes as people in UK face the second day of an extreme heat wave which is causing widespread disruption and raising the risk of wildfires. Health authorities urge people to take precautions, including staying indoors and drinking plenty of water. It comes as many parts of Europe and North Africa are also currently experiencing extreme temperatures, with wildfires breaking out in France, Spain, Portugal, Greece and Morocco, forcing thousands of people to evacuate their homes. On to sports now. In shooting, two-time Olympian Mehraj Ahmed Khan created history by becoming the first Indian shooter to win the gold medal in the men's skeet event at the ISSF World Cup in Changwon, South Korea yesterday. India also won a bronze in the women's 50 meters rifle 3 positions team event. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter @AIR News Alerts.
Sensex and the Nifty today logged modest gains. Both stock indices added even as global share markets were negative. The Sensex closed above the 54,750 points, while the Nifty finished near 16,350 level. A report from the business desk.
The Sensex surged 246 points or 0.45% to finish at 54,768. The Nifty also rose 62 points or 0.38% to end at 16,341. At the global stock markets, Asian stocks traded mixed. Japan's Nikkei 225, which gained 0.7%, Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index declined 0.9%, South Korea's Kospi slipped marginally by 0.2%, and Singapore's Straits Times closed 0.1% down. China's Shanghai Composite Index ended flat. European shares were also mixed in intraday trade. The crude prices fell around 2% in intraday trade. Brent crude was trading at $104.35 per barrel. And in the forex market, the rupee appreciated 3 paise against the US dollar. The domestic currency closed at 79 rupees and 95 paise against the American unit. V. Ravi Kumar for World News All India Radio.
And now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. First, we have a look at the press reports on China. Major Indian media outlets reported that the Indian and Chinese armies on the 16th round of high-level talks agreed to work out a mutually accepted resolution of the remaining issues in eastern Ladakh at the earliest. The joint statement was issued on Monday night, a day after the two sides held the talks that lasted for around 12 and a half hours to revive and complete the halted disengagement process. The diplomat writes the foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan reaffirmed on Monday the importance of bilateral ties and the three-way relationship with the United States as they renewed efforts to mend relations amid the war in Ukraine and other global tensions. Global Times reported around 500 people were found infected with COVID-19 over 5 days at a tourist resort in China's Guangxi region. The outbreak left over 2,000 tourists stranded in Beihai City due to a coronavirus flare-up that hit the holiday resort. China Daily writes the Indian Army is recruiting Chinese language experts and encouraging soldiers to learn military terms in Chinese so as to improve communication with their Chinese counterpart.
Now let's have a look at the press reports on Nepal. Khabar Hub reports that the ruling Nepali Congress NC has decided to face the upcoming parliamentary and provincial elections by forming an alliance. The party has decided to forge an electoral alliance to ensure a clear majority in the upcoming. Khabar Hub writes that the National Assembly NA members have demanded the endorsement of a bill to amend the Citizenship Act 2006 as soon as possible. My Republica reports that the main opposition party CPN-UML has announced to deploy its local people's representatives to monitor the market in view of soaring inflation. Chief of the Consumers Welfare Protection and Good Governance Committee of the party, Yagyaraj Sunowar, accused the government of failing to tame the unbridled inflation in the country. Kathmandu Post reports that the Nepal Oil Corporation is set to pay around 17 billion rupees to Indian Oil Corporation to reduce the outstanding dues of over 30 billion, according to a senior official at the state-owned oil monopoly.
Now let's have a look at the press reports from Pakistan. Geo News reports that despite landslide victory against PMLN in the by-election for 20 constituencies of Punjab, PTI chairman Imran Khan accused the coalition government of using very ugly tactic to ensure that that's PTI, lose the polls.
And now report from Balochistan. The Daily Times writes that Pakistan Meteorological Department PMD has forecast rain, thunderstorms with few heavy falls in few parts of Balochistan province in the next 24 hours.
And now a quick look at the headlines once again. In Sri Lanka, acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe, Anurag Kumar Dissanayaka and Dulas Alla Perma to contest for the presidency in Parliament tomorrow. All-party meeting held in New Delhi to discuss Sri Lanka situation. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar says India provided $8 billion to Sri Lanka, while no other country came forward. Bangladesh announces a countrywide load shedding up to 2 hours daily starting from today. Iran to join as the newest member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In a three-way summit, Iran hosts Russia and Turkey for talks on the Syria war today. Western Europe sweltered today as a ferocious heatwave heads north. Deadly wildfire in France, Portugal, Spain and Greece forces thousands to evacuate their homes. And Mehraj Ahmad Khan becomes first Indian shooter to win gold medal in the men's skeet event at ISSF World Cup in South Korea. And now before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnava by artists from Georgia. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.